all, welcome to this webinar. I am Chris Irons from Strata consultancy firm Strata Solve, stratasolve.com.au, and alongside me, as always, Frank Higginson, partner, Hines Legal, industry expert of.
I don't know which one's actually which in terms of colours, but wonder where you're going with that, Chris. But
I guess, Frank, what we're talking about here is situations. Topic that we get asked about. God, every topic we get asked about a lot. Another one that we get asked about a lot is not so much how you join a committee or how you are eligible for a body corporate committee, but how you get involved with a body corporate committee. And I guess, Frank, what we're talking about here is situations where you're not on the committee, how you get involved otherwise.
absolutely. And I suppose it's one of those things that probably ties back a little bit to what we were talking about last week with appointment of administrators, because there's definitely one of the questions I'm sure we've both been asked over the years is, I can't get on the committee and the committee's in control and they're doing things that I don't think they should be doing, and therefore I should have an administrator appointed. It's not the way it works. Like this body corporate democracy, it's you know, one of the easiest parallels I say for people when looking at bodies corporates to compare it to things that they might be more familiar with is companies. You've got a company, you've got all of the shareholders, and you've got a board of directors. So what we talk about in a body corporate sense is the shareholders in a body corporate are the lot owners, the board of directors is the committee. And in a corporate sense, there is a very, very clear line of demarcation between what shareholders can do and the board. And I suppose you go to general meetings of BHP and all that sort of stuff. It's a very formal process. Bodies corporate, as much as there is a raft of legislation around them, the committee element of this isn't quite as formal as what you'd get in a company arrangement. And I suppose what we're talking about today is if you are one of those shareholders or lot owners and there's a committee there and you want to engage, how do you go about that?
There are ways and means. In fact, we think there are several ways and means for you to do so, which might come as a surprise for some people who find being involved or having some engagement with their Strata committee to be a bit of a challenge. We actually think there are ways to do it, and we'll go through those in a minute. If you have got queries, and particularly if it's a much more involved query, you can get in touch with us. There will be some links that will come up throughout, which will enable you to fill in some details so that we can get back to you. Let's rip into it though, Frank. First point that we want to make about getting involved with the committee, and I think this applies for you if you're not on the committee, really the fundamental issue that you need to keep in mind. Committees are volunteers. So what does that mean? We think it means you don't demand or hector. It means you be a bit respectful and complimentary, I think. What do you think, Frank? Offer some praise where it's warranted.
Absolutely. And I mean, I know we did one of these webinars at some stages. I don't know how many of them we've done now, mate, but there's a lot of them, 50 or 60 or 80 odd, and I know I had a little bit of feedback on it from a couple of clients. It might have been the ones of dealing with your resident manager where sort of demanding things and not saying, well done, thank you, and all that sort of stuff. It's just like the reality is that a committee member as a volunteer and you as a lot owner need to have some form of relationship. Like in a sense, you're in a legal one because you're the co-owner of a lot in this body corporate. But if you want to go about doing things by way of being aggressive, demanding, threatening, then it clearly is not going to lead to a good personal relationship. And in this sense, you know, we talk about committees and bodies corporates as being the fourth layer of government. It's just not going to inspire people to help. And you have to remember that even if you are on the outside looking in, the committee members, as volunteers, they've probably got day jobs. they've definitely probably got other things going on in their lives, relationships, investments, whatever it might be. And usually they're doing that role for no remuneration at all. So it can be down the list. And I think the starting point to recognise that is they're not going to respond to your email within half an hour. As service providers, Chris and I will more than likely will, because our income and our living depends on that.
Yeah,
But
that
committee members, it
depends.
doesn't.
But no, it's a good point, Frank. That one, it's an excellent point. In fact, I think another one is that if you happen to live on site and you've got committee members living on site as well, I reckon don't go bailing them up in the car park, and certainly don't do that in a kind of an aggressive way. By all means, if you've got a decent relationship, if you're in the business of enhancing the current relationship, approach politely, respectfully, be wary. If someone is clearly busy or doing something else, then maybe avoid that. But otherwise, if there's an opportunity, you run into them in the lift or in the corridor, yeah, just have a chat. How's it going? Blah, blah, blah. But don't just bail them up when they're at the pool trying to enjoy themselves. That's not going to work, we don't think.
No.
Go through the proper channels. I think, Frank, you were just talking about this. If your body corporate is set up in such a way that communication is going through the body corporate manager, then respect that process. Go through those channels. And Frank's favourite, what are your favourites here, Frank? Remember what you write. Be very cautious of what you write.
And that's only because at some stage it may be evidence. That's the reality. If you're going to have an argument later about this from a lot owner's perspective, it applies equally to committee members. If you're going to have a dispute later on about whether someone has acted reasonably or made the right decision or the wrong decision or otherwise, what's going to go into evidence is going to be that chain of correspondence where potentially you're calling each other names, which is never a good look. And regardless of the legal position, some legal issues are well and truly black and white, but there's some that are arguable, there's some that are grey. And I mean, the core of Strata legislation is this obligation to act reasonably, which by its very nature is subjective. So, and decision makers can absolutely be influenced by how people relate to each other. So if I'm the aggressive one calling Chris all sorts of names in correspondence, and Chris is responding with, you know what, I don't appreciate that. I recognise your right to put correspondence to me and I'm going to make a decision shortly, blah, blah, blah. You can tell immediately who's looking more reasonable. It's going to be Chris.
Yeah.
Because the other thing to remember, and we get this a little bit as well, is that committee members are not decision makers in their own right. So committee makes a decision as a committee. So if you are asking a committee to enforce a bylaw or asking a committee to do something, the committee itself is the one that needs to make that decision. The chairperson doesn't, as much as I suppose we see it from time to time, mate, where individual body corporate members might charge off and do things off their own volition. But there's no ability to do that under the Act. Every committee must make a committee decision to do something. So, and that's really what it's all about.
Yeah. And finally, just to finish off this particular topic, and I know that, Frank, you've written a newsletter about this one in the past, is the votes outside committee meetings, decisions made that way.
Yeah, I just thought this might be a little bit relevant. So there was a while back, so Clayton's committee meetings, and Chris will put that link up. That was one where committees should be transparent, should be accountable, should be able to explain their decisions. Occasionally, committees can fall into a regime of deciding everything by vote outside committee. So most things are decided at physical committee meetings. We'll have an agenda, run through things, vote on motions, etc., etc. The other thing that pops up from time to time is we need a decision now on a particular issue, and they do that by voting outside committee, so that basically a vote comes out, you want to say yes or no to this, you say yes or no, and it goes back, decision's made, no meeting about it per se, but it just happens. So the newsletter I wrote there was where an adjudicator had sort of hopped into a committee to a degree about trying to make every decision sort of without any transparency or accountability to owners, and all owners got was the VOC. So I thought that might be a little bit relevant in terms of that volunteering element, because committees aren't going to usually meet every week to make decisions like you would in a business. They might meet every 3, 4, 6 months. So it's not quite realistic either to
Yeah.
expect committees to meet your timeframes, but by the same token, there's an expectation, as much as it's not statutory, that you might get together more than once every 12 months, which would be the AGM. But again, it's always that balance.
We'll get you that link to that newsletter that you'll be able to access that afterwards. But now, the most, I guess, the most obvious way to get involved with the committee, Frank, is to attend a meeting. Sounds simple enough, and I guess it can be. But I think there's a misconception out there that if I'm an owner and I'm not on the committee, I just rock up to a committee meeting and that is that. But it's far from that kind of simple, isn't it, Frank?
It is. Yeah, correct. So I suppose the essence of it all is that everyone's going to be told about these committee meetings. And something that's been in the modules almost from the start is that if you're not a committee member and you want to attend, you've got to give 24 hours written notice to the body corporate of that attendance. And if you don't, then you're not allowed in. So the committee always is in control of who comes in. So if Chris knocks on the door as the committee's getting together and said, oh, there's a committee meeting on, do you mind if I come in? The committee said, yeah, sure, come in, away you go. No problem at all. But if you want to enforce that right to be there, you must give 24 hours written notice. And most body corporate software programs sort of indicate that in the notice to owners that there's a committee meeting coming up. This is what you've got to do to attend. But again, it's incumbent on you to know.
Absolutely. Bearing in mind also you can be asked to leave once you're there too. So, and also bear in mind, good point to keep in mind is where the meeting's being held. If that's being held in someone's lot, remember that you are at somebody's house on their invitation. So that can be withdrawn, that invitation, particularly if you misbehave. And also the other one, which I think is a really good one, and I think a lot of people would be quite affronted by this, Frank, if they weren't already aware of it. You only really can speak if you're spoken to.
It's almost like going to watch Parliament. You know, I don't know how many people have actually done that, but you don't sit up there in the gallery and yell abuse down at the politicians on the floor. And it's the same in body corporate. So what this is, again, is about, I suppose, transparency, people's ability to see body corporate decision making, but not necessarily engagement. So if you want to, and this, sometimes happens, and this is, when we're advising committees or lot owners, one of the things that you really want to make sure is that there is the ability to have your say. So, for example, if we were advising a lot owner who wanted something considered at a committee meeting and they'd put a motion in about that, certainly the committee can ask them to leave while the committee's discussing that particular issue, but there's no reason that the committee can't ask the lot owner to talk to the motion they've put forward. That's up to the committee to do that.
Yeah,
it's up to the committee's call. But in terms of, again, you'd call it natural justice and acting reasonably and all those sort of things, sometimes it's absolutely going to be reasonable to say, okay, Chris, you've given us a motion. What's it all about, mate?
Yep. And there's no point arguing with the committee at that point and saying, I think this is all really unfair and unjust. It doesn't matter what you think. This is what the legislation says applies under the circumstances. Now, I've attended committee meetings with clients, and I remember one in particular where I went and I took my seat in the back row. It was a huge meeting for whatever reason, and the whole speak unless you're spoken to, I kept my mouth shut because that was my job to do so. I can tell you that very few other people obeyed that speak unless you were spoken to rule. And interestingly, the committee let that go. And so you can see that they were trying to have some kind of engagement there. At the end, it was probably to their detriment to do that because there was a lot of chat going on and it got a bit out of control as well. But the point being that the committee can decide to not so much ignore those rules, but have a bit of flexibility with them too. And I think that's what you were just saying there, Frank. So if you approach it in the right way, better the chance that you will actually get the outcome that you want, as opposed to barging in there and demanding things. And that leads to our next point, which is where you rock up and you decide that you want to start recording the meeting as well. Always a good idea, Frank, to let people know you're thinking of doing that.
Yeah, and look, the legislation or the rules around these vary from state to state, but I think the simple rule of recording people Fight Club is unless you're a party to the conversation, personally, you can't do it. So you're not doing it on phones, and you're certainly not sitting in the back of rooms recording things. So where I think, mate, we've both got to over the years is you are much better off saying to people, do you mind if I record the meeting?
And say I'm doing it because I might not remember all of the details of it, just as to help me. That has a lot more chance of people going, oh, that's fine, don't care, as opposed to partway through, the battery on your recorder suddenly dies and makes a terrible beeping sound, and everyone realizes what you've been doing secretly. So, and that's never going to fly well for you. So I guess they're the formalities about attending a committee meeting, which leads us to the next point about getting involved, which is where you have somebody attend either with you or instead of you. So Frank, the instead of options.
Well, I suppose the power of attorney is still an option if it's just one person to go along. But the reality is that this was one of the changes in the new regulation modules that commenced 11 months ago or so, Chris, now. Remember that flurry at the time?
Yep.
Where effectively, in the way we both read the legislation, is that you don't actually need to be anyone associated with the scheme now, which was under the previous incarnation of the laws. It can just be someone who you want, almost a support person. So it could be a lawyer, it could be a Strata consultant, and they can go instead of you.
Member, hey Frank.
Yeah, absolutely, a fellow lot owner. It's really that it's a very, very wide pool of people now, and it doesn't require any particular appointment or form in that sense, like a power of attorney to actually do it. So if I wanted to go to a committee meeting, I was giving my 24 hours notice as a visitor, I'd be saying I'm also going to bring along my Strata consultant, Chris Irons, as an observer. And that's so it's not at the exclusion of. So what these new regulations definitely did was to create some sort of consistency between what happens at general meetings and what happens at committee meetings.
Yeah.
So at general meetings, you've always been able to go along as a proxy and sit there with the person who appointed you as the proxy. So Chris could own the lot and I could go, even though I'm not a lot owner. Now, at committee level, Chris as a lot owner doesn't even need to appoint me as proxy to attend. He can just say, Frank's coming with me.
Yeah.
And in whatever capacity. So if you're feeling uncomfortable or you want someone there to hold your hand, or you want someone else there to make sure that they're not on the attack or otherwise, absolutely, that's a way you can do it.
And we think that the way to go about this is to be clear and transparent about what you're doing there, and very clear about who it is that's coming and in what capacity as well. So I want my Strata consultant to attend that meeting with me. Here are the details. We'll see you then. Make sure you do it in writing. Give the proper notice about how you do that. Frank, there might be a bit of strategic news about how you do that, hey?
Absolutely. And I mean, I suppose that's all part of the game, as much as it's not a game to the people actually involved. And mate, as you said, you went to that committee meeting and suddenly it's quite funny there. As a general rule, I usually say to clients, I'm happy to go to meetings. It doesn't worry me. I'm quite good on my feet. I can be quite argumentative. You just got to ask my brothers and my family, my wife. But and I've gone to plenty of meetings over the years, and clients said, "Oh, look out, this is going to happen. This person will do this and all that sort of stuff." And dead set, I have not ever walked into one. Actually, I have reframed that. Walked into one where I actually had to do what I was there to do. But most times, every other time, in fact, people have not gone off their trees, yelling the abusive things, misbehaving the way that my client thought they might, because suddenly a lawyer or a Strata consultant in the room who's a former commissioner tends to dampen people's enthusiasm for doing their own things that might not necessarily be right. So even the notice...
What it does, Frank, is it demonstrates that you're willing to take decisive steps to protect your interests, even if nothing happens, like you say. And that's how it would typically always be, except for those exceptions. It demonstrates that you're actually willing to do something about it. And once you make that demonstration to others in the scheme, chances are they, as you say, Frank, will accept that for what it is and run with it.
Absolutely. And I suppose, Chris, the other thing that we probably should mention is one of the things they definitely changed, which is a brand new provision in the new modules that commenced, was the ability for owners to have committees now make decisions on things. So we did a webinar on that. We'll put up the link for that as well. So owners previously couldn't require committees to make decisions on issues. Now they can. So, and the webinar we did on that was a really interesting one. So that's, you know, contextually in terms of getting involved with your committee, if there's, again, being strategic about how you exercise those rights, then who might attend and how you give notice of that from a lot owner's perspective is a really important thing. And also from the committee side of things, making sure that you manage that the right way has become even more important. So we've given a little bit of advice on that thus far, but I think almost, mate, like hazards and smoking, that's a sleeper that will be appearing over the next 12, 18 months, 2 years, and probably inevitably after we get a Commissioner's Office decision relating to it for the first time will be quite interesting.
Absolutely, Frank. Let's move on then. So we've talked about issues about attending or having someone attend with you or instead of you. What about getting involved without any kind of attendance? This is probably where I think most people can actually get involved with your committee, and it's as simple as getting the agendas and reading them, getting the minutes and reading them, making sure your email address is up to date so you can receive agendas and minutes and not complain that you never did. There's nothing wrong with asking questions or commenting on the minutes and agendas, is there, Frank?
No, not at all. And for me, exercising your voting rights at general meeting remains that thing to do. It's the thing that becomes unhelpful for us with clients at sometimes is when they come to us after things have been voted on at general meeting and they're unhappy with that outcome. And that's the first time they've actually got involved in whatever that particular issue is. So usually, but not always, things on general meeting agendas won't be surprises. So take, for example, a special levy to fund an improvement project. That has probably been in the minutes of the committee meeting or committee meetings 12, 18 months, maybe more, maybe there's quotes, maybe it's a whole bunch of stuff going on about we're going to need to spend $1 million. And then suddenly it's on the AGM agenda, it's voted through and people are going, hang on a minute, how did that happen? Well, to be fair, if you'd engaged with your body corporate and kept an eye, and not an eye in a bad way, but being interested enough to read what's going on, you'd understand. And the time for exercising those rights to question and getting involved or finding out what's going on are when the discussions are being had. Because once it's on an EGM agenda or a general meeting agenda, you can't change it really in any substantial way. That's done. That's what people are going to ask to be voted on. Becomes unscramblable. You can't undo that.
That's right. It's a really good point. We talked about asking questions or making comments on minutes and agendas. Make sure they're reasonable. Don't nitpick and ask a reasonable question if there's something that's absent. I think that's a good start point. If there's something which is glaringly absent from either of those documents, that's a question to ask. Oh, I thought we were talking about this. I thought this was happening and it doesn't seem to be reflected here. Ask reasonable questions. There are other ways to get involved as well that aren't quite like that. If you're not on a committee, either because you don't want to be or you don't have the time to be or for other reasons, there are other ways that you can actually get involved as like a volunteer. You might have a skill set that's actually really useful for the committee, like if you're really good at graphic design, good with IT, good writing skills, some form of some skill that you can contribute to the committee. Doesn't mean that you become a committee member, but it means you're getting involved in that process. There's plenty of ways that can happen.
Most committees with good relationships with owners will welcome the additional help.
That's
the reality of it. There's the odd one that wants to control everything, but I'd say the vast bulk of committees are looking for additional hands. Maybe not on a full-time bit, but for a specific, we're doing this. You've got an engineering background, you're doing some project work. Can I give you a hand with that? Even procuring quotes.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're right, Frank. They'd love that. Finally then, our final kind of tip for getting involved with the committee, and this is the sort of the biggest that we're going to talk about. Get on the committee yourself, basically. And there's a good rule of thumb here. If you don't nominate for the committee, then you lose all rights to complain about it afterwards. Now, I said nominate. I didn't say win the vote. I said nominate. So if you're not going to nominate for the committee, that's fine. You might have your reasons for that, but I think you lose your right to throw stones from the sidelines if that's the case. And if you do nominate for the committee and you don't get up, but if the numbers don't go your way, suck it up. That's it. Okay, don't suck it up if something went seriously wrong or sinister. Don't suck that up. But if simply the vote did not go your way, accept it. Don't use that as an excuse to white out. That's a recipe for disaster, isn't it, Frank?
Well, it's going to keep us busy, isn't it, mate? Because that happens a bit. Sour
Yeah.
grapes happens a bit.
It does. And I guess the points there, we hear a lot about factions, Frank, and there's this voting block here and this faction here. What's wrong with that? That's how things work. That's human behavior for you. Get involved with the factions and the voting blocks if that is so much of an issue to you. You can lobby, you can get in there and you can agitate for the results that you want if you feel that strongly about it. But again, if everything's been done legit by the books and done properly, it's very hard to be able to complain about that if you simply don't like what that means.
Nominating's easy, isn't it? Yeah, it's like end of financial year. Make sure you're financial. You can self-nominate. You put it in, and it would make some sense, I suppose, if it's not a contested election, to go to one of the committee members, even ring the body corporate manager and say, "Hey, I'd like to get involved. Are there vacant positions coming up? Is someone stepping down? Go knock on the chairperson's door and say, I'd love to get involved. How do I get involved, mate?"
And then if it is contested, Frank, then think about that too. If you know for sure that you putting up your hand, you're going to be throwing yourself into a big pool and it's going to involve a ballot, then think about how you want to play in that space. Are you going to go hard? Are you going to campaign? You're going to lobby, or are you going to sit back and just hope for the best? Up to you. But you've got to realise that it might not necessarily go your way. And if it doesn't, don't complain.
Yeah, and it's the public shaming that is sometimes not the public shaming, but the fact that you've lost is sometimes difficult for people to deal with. So you always can withdraw, because I mean the reality is that you get to the end of financial year, nominations must be in the next day. Who's nominated is a body corporate record, so it's available. So if you have got a Melbourne Cup field for your particular role and you don't feel like going through that process, then withdraw at that stage. You don't even need to have your name up.
And if you find out afterwards, approaching the meeting, that somebody tells you, "Hey, listen, it's just not going to happen. People, for whatever reason, want blah blah, and they're not necessarily fans of yours," read the room. Read the room. That's a whole other topic, that one, isn't it? So the takeaways for today, then. So as you all know, we always like to finish up with a few takeaways about what this all means. I think, hopefully, what we've described here, Frank and I, is that there are plenty of options for non-committee members to get involved. But whichever one of those you choose, it should be based upon a realistic assessment of the time and effort that you're willing to spend on it. And I reckon here, and the second takeaway, Frank, and this might be a bit confronting for some people to hear, try and be a bit honest with yourself about your motives on this one. Is there a particular outcome that you are wanting? Are your motives truly altruistic, that you want to participate so you can contribute to your body corporate, or do you just want to be a spoiler? If it's the latter, I'm thinking this webinar probably is not really what you're after, Frank. Would you agree?
We could do a webinar on how to be a spoiler, because we've seen enough of that behaviour. But yeah, so this is a bit more of a genuine one for people looking at genuine one. Everyone's got genuine reasons, but for people looking at how do they get involved in a genuine way, this is aimed at you.
Absolutely.
And there's plenty of opportunity. There really is, and most committees will be willingly embrace more people wanting to contribute.
Absolutely. And remember, by contributing and getting involved, you're actually taking a proactive step in protecting your investment. That's what this is all about at the end of the day. Thank you, everybody. There's a lot there in that topic, and so if this particular topic has kind of raised a couple of interesting questions or ideas or comments or concepts for you, get in touch, and we'll see what we can do to assist. But for now, Frank, thank you. Great conversation as always.
As always, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We really do appreciate you making the effort. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.